Yeah, the question being the simultaneous budget requests on security for the use of the state patrol. We're talking with the incoming administration about federal support for National Guard when we use them, not only in security missions, but for missions in long-term care, the way they've helped us with that. And I think what it signals to me is I'm not telling anyone here anything they don't already know. There's going to be some big events come up this year in Minnesota, and not least is the trial of George Floyd's death. And I think we're starting to see these are complex operations. They're expensive. It's about making sure that we're right sizing. And again, we can't err on the side of having too few people. You have to err on the side of having too many. So I think what it signals is it's just a prudent understanding that the situation has changed. I think, again, listening to the folks speak, shocked but not surprised, the accumulation that happened last week. And we know that there's folks from Minnesota traveled to be a part of that. So I don't think it just goes away. But yeah, I think it signals that. And it just signals the fact that I've asked an awful lot out of these agencies, as I'm sure the mayor has asked out of his. And that costs money. So we're gonna ask the legislature to help us with that.
Governor, I was wondering if you could explain, or somebody up there could explain the actual rules and the laws around carrying shotguns and rifles, long guns, both at the state capitol and in other areas in public, which would include the governor's residence and the streets of the city of St. Paul.
I can answer that with respect to the Capitol complex, but I might look to the chief to answer that if there's a nuance related to city ordinance or other things that he wants to add in. I can tell you within the state capitol in Minnesota, long guns are prohibited. It's been that way for a long time. Capitol's building is closed itself right now, but within the complex of the Minnesota State Capitol, there are no additional restrictions beyond for firearms beyond which are anywhere in the state of Minnesota. So your question, as I understand it correctly, if you have a long gun or a shotgun, if you're carrying it, you need to have a permit to carry, regardless of if you're on Summit Avenue or on the Capitol complex itself. Within the Capitol building, those two particular weapons, long guns and shotguns, are prohibited.
So just to clarify, you can open carry a long gun outside if you have a permit to carry, notwithstanding any other St. Paul ordinance, because there's the transportation rule as well about facing it.
Right. Yeah. So this is a question that we get pretty regularly, and I can ask, the chief gets this question a lot too. The answer to your question is, can you do that under state law? The answer is yes. Transportation within a vehicle is different. For some people, that's a juxtaposition against common sense. That's how the law reads.
And chief, in the city of St. Paul, there's no separate thing that restricts that, just to clarify?
That's correct. Now, private businesses, private property can restrict weapons on their property. There is some confusion out there, and I think this is a good opportunity to clarify. When we talk about concealed carry, there's no concealed carry in the state of Minnesota. It's carry. If you have a permit to carry, a legal lawful permit to carry, you don't have to conceal that firearm. So you can have a long gun around your over your shoulder, or you can have a firearm on your side. There is no need to conceal it under state law. Now, whether that should be or not, that's another topic, but I can tell you that's state law. Thank you.
Governor?
And I'm going to follow up on that because I am going to jump right into this one. This issue around Second Amendment rights, the issue, and it's no secret that I have been a firearms owner my entire life. But I just want to make very clear, we all know what this is about, and the insanity of some of this. Civil debate, especially at a legislative body, is where we settle our differences on things. The same could be said with your neighbor, and I keep bringing this up. Let's all be very, very clear. In the midst of heated debates, especially around a presidential election with false claims of voter fraud and tensions running high, you're not carrying that weapon about a freedom or a statement. You're carrying it about intimidation. And I just want us to all have that conversation, that just because you have the right to do something doesn't mean you can. I've used this countless times. You have something about a fence dispute with your neighbor and you go over and knock on the door to talk to them. That's what neighbors do. They talk and get this out. You may not even be happy about it. You walk over there carrying an AR-15, the situation is different and the conversation is different. And it's because you have the right and a constitutional right to have that firearm, which I served 24 years in the military to defend. Doesn't mean you should be doing it. You have the right to own a chainsaw, but you shouldn't take a running chainsaw into McDonald's just to prove that you have the freedom to do so. It puts other people's freedoms at risk. It puts other people's ability. So I just want to be very clear about this conversation, and I would check with these folks. The state of Michigan has a Republican House and a Republican Senate, and they changed their rules. For goodness gracious, this is not something that inhibits your ability to purchase, own, shoot, or do whatever you want to do. But in the middle of a heated political debate on public land where other people come, to carry that thing in a reckless manner is meant to intimidate. That's why you're doing it. Because you have the legal right to buy one. You have the legal right to carry one. But why in that space are you bringing it? Now, again, not to express that. You know why you're bringing it. And so I would like maybe the Lieutenant Governor, this is a question that will come up in the advisory committee on capital area security. And I would encourage a robust conversation about this. And I would note, we wanted to have a robust conversation about some of these things last year, but one member of the Senate said, I'm not interested in it, and it never had a hearing. So after we saw in the United States Capitol, and when we see firearms, whether it be in front of my house or other members of the legislator's house or the Capitol, we need to have that conversation. So, Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Governor. And I would just say that this is a conversation that's been going on for a very long time. And it's a conversation that we need to have again. My understanding is that there are 2 capitals where you can carry a firearm. That's us and Montana. And in Montana, you have to open carry. You cannot conceal it. So we are overdue for this conversation. I know on the advisory committee on capital area security, we will have this conversation. Senator Dibble, who serves on that committee, has brought this up, and I think it is time to have this conversation, especially as we're sitting with our leaders in law enforcement who are doing all they can to keep us safe and to keep the folks safe who serve in the legislature, but the folks who come there to advocate on causes that they care passionately about. People should feel safe in the Capitol. And what I would also just mention is, as a former member of the Minnesota House, one of the changes that was made due to public safety was to put troopers in the gallery whenever House members were on the floor, because there are risks. And I think we are ready to have this conversation. What we witnessed, the attack on the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and the tensions that we're feeling now, it's time. And I look forward to having a robust conversation with folks on both sides of the aisle about those needs to absolutely protect people's rights, but also to have that balance with safety.
Lieutenant Governor, Michigan, they banned the open carry of guns, but not complete carry of firearms into the Capitol. What's your view on how far the state should go in that direction?
I think we need to have that conversation. My job as the chair of the advisory committee is to ensure that we are hearing folks from the House and the Senate, from people on both sides of the aisle, about what they want to see and how people feel safe when they're in the Capitol. As Colonel Langer could tell you, there are a myriad of different safety precautions that are taken at capitals all across the country. I think we are just overdue for a more intentional conversation. We are responding here with our leaders in law enforcement in the short term. And our role as the advisory committee is to have those longer term conversations about what needs to be physically in place, both at the Capitol building itself, but in the Capitol complex overall. And what are the things that we should change in statute to ensure people's security? So I will absolutely convene those conversations. And I know that we can have those conversations in a way that are thoughtful and respectful, that put the rights of Minnesotans first and foremost, but also in a way that we can talk about what it truly means for everyone who comes into this house to be safe.
With so much focus on, oh, Mayor Carter, are you going to speak?
Yes. Thank you. And I don't want to take us too far off of the topic. Because of the events that happened last week at the nation's capital, it has keyed us in to the need to think about security and to think about guns, Dave, differently to ensure the safety of our nation's capitals, of our state capitals. You asked if there was more specific ordinance or policy for the city of St. Paul, and firearms have been sort of crafted out as in the realm of state government. And so that makes it challenging for us to add additional policies on top of that. Although I will say that I want to know what opportunity we may have as our legislators, and I know that I'm confident that the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor agree with what I'm about to say. As our legislators look at the events of the last week and determine what changes are necessary to keep them safe from gun violence, I would encourage us to ensure that we know that that is the people's house and our job to keep every Minnesotan safe. And I am the mayor of a city that closed the year by losing a 2-year-old to gun violence. And this conversation is very intimate for us and very critical for us. And I just wasn't able to have the conversation about the need for us to take another look at how we engage guns around our state capital without just speaking up to implore us to take this moment to say every child in our community, every family in our community deserves the exact same level of safety and security that we are rehearsing right now our need to establish at the state capitol.
With so much focus on the U.S. capitals or the state capitals around the country, how much concern is there for the surrounding buildings in this area, the surrounding neighborhoods here in St. Paul, and how much of the plan is focused on those areas? Because if the whole plan is focused on the Capitol, maybe, these people may go somewhere else.
Right, I'll let the experts. I described it this week as we're talking about it. You squeeze the balloon, it comes out somewhere else. Are we just driving people to softer targets? And that has been obviously from the beginning taken in. I'll let them discuss how that happened.
It's a great question about secondary targets, and it is a question that we have brought up at the Department of Public Safety with both Chief Axtell and also with Chief Rondo over in Minneapolis, with the sheriffs in the 2 major cities. And the reason I point to those communities in particular is because the dialogue and the aspirational chatter that keeps getting talked about is focused on a very anti-government message. And so we began looking at what those secondary targets would be in terms of the obvious and most important symbols of government, both at the federal, state, and local level. And we have planned for, with the local and county and state authorities, to make sure that they also are part of our planning model. I don't want to go into which buildings or which ones, but I can tell you that both state, federal, local, and county authorities have brought in additional resources to make sure that those secondary areas are protected. And then in addition to that, because we had this whole issue around people showing up at elected officials' houses, we have also enlisted the aid of police chiefs and sheriffs all over the state of Minnesota to work with their local elected officials so that they are already on alert about where those officials live and have already begun thinking about what their response will be. I can tell you on a short personal note, one of the ones that we had that happened in St. Paul, I got the call from the legislature. I called Chief Axtell, and within literally minutes, I was getting a call back from the legislature saying, "Oh, St. Paul police have already arrived," and the folks that were walking around, and tying into the earlier conversation, walking around with open carry, left. But I want you to think about this, and I think this is an important image for you. how would you feel if your kids were at home by themselves? How would you feel if your wife or your husband was at home by themselves, and all of a sudden 20 people with AR-15s and shotguns strapped across their back started to converge on your house? That's what we're facing at this point. And so it's not a theoretical for us. These are matters of life and death, and keeping people safe and keeping them from having unnecessary and completely unwarranted fear.
Is a weekend curfew being discussed, Mayor, Governor?
No, there has not been any discussion. We have certainly looked at that in the past, but there has not been a discussion based on the current information that we have.
Commissioner, I wondered how you go about protecting people. It sounded like you are thinking of a very swift action for any violence that might break out. How do you protect the peaceful demonstrators among violent people? Because we know that in past situations over the last year, people who were peacefully protesting have been severely injured just by being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So the question is, how do we protect the peaceful demonstrators? And I can tell you that Colonel Langer is, unfortunately, his folks have had way too much experience with doing this. So at the Capitol, when we've had protests and counter protests, we have seen peaceful protesters encircled by a countervailing argument, and they have been pushed and shoved and yelled at. I've also known that some of the members of the media have also experienced that. Our method with that has been to create a buffer zone, and literally we have had to put state troopers or other police officers literally back to back, creating a line between the groups so that we were then the buffer that kept them from being able to get at each other. The other way that we've looked at doing this, and that has been somewhat successful, is to actually create, for want of a better way of describing it, free speech zones, and designating particular areas with a gap between them so that the groups are not immediately adjacent to each other. Yes, go ahead, Dave.
Clarification for General Menke. 850 National Guardsmen to the U.S. Capitol. How many have been activated to the military police unit in Minnesota?
We are mobilizing the one MP company right now, but we have other elements that are ready to go, I guess, if needed. It's all based on the threat that we see that comes in, and what's going on the ground will allow us flexibility to make that decision if in fact we need to bring more in, or if in fact we can let some go.
And to remind people, how many in a company?
There's about 100, a little over 100 in the company.
Any other questions?
I have a few, but they're not related to this.
Sure, we can go
Is that
off.
okay? Thank you.
Yep.
I got a whole list from my colleagues. I can do one at a time if other folks have them. First, I wondered your response to the Senate Republicans' bill that plans to really chip away at your executive powers.
Yeah, well, look, whether it be a global pandemic or whether it be a threat, the state of Minnesota's constitution and the elected officials have codified the legal rights that the governor has. And those have stood up in federal court and state court every single time. Now, if they want to talk about how these powers should be employed, how they should be used, I'm more than happy to hear that. But this conversation happening at this time in the middle of the pandemic makes me think it's because they don't like to wear a mask or they don't like the decisions that were made. That is a separate conversation on what the legal powers are granted by both the Constitution and statute. So I'm certainly open to having that. But as we've seen, instead of trying to work with me and trying to find some of these things, it's just easier to complain. And I'll still come back to this. The emergency powers we're using are doing things like changing some of the regulations to protect veterans at our state veterans homes. Some of the regulations we use are to protect folks so they're not evicted as they're being asked to stay home from their job. And those are the things that should happen. And I would have to say, the language around this issue of emergency powers When you as a legislature go in front of an angry crowd at a time where we're seeing insurrection, and you tell people that the governor is a tyrant, the governor is unconstitutional, the governor is abusing his powers to take away your liberties, all of those things are untrue. The question you asked is, how do I feel about discussing that? I think there's a time and a place to do that. I'm certainly willing to do that. I certainly think that there's changes that we need to make sure that we're not in a situation, because very honest, for the state of Minnesota, a couple of votes different in the House, and we would have a death rate equal to South Dakota or North Dakota or Iowa, which would mean instead of 5,500 deaths, we'd have 11,000 deaths. Instead of 450,000 cases, we would have 800,000 cases. And so I want to be very clear on what the implications are of doing that. But I'm open to the conversation. I'm simply not open to putting Minnesotans at risk.
Governor, can you comment, sorry, can you comment on the Washington Post report this morning that there was actually no vaccine reserves to begin with, and how that might throw a wrench in the state's plans that have already been jolted by the changes in who qualifies for a vaccine?
Yeah, and I'm getting it too this morning in communication with other governors. For those of you unfamiliar with this question, the federal government has been charged, if you will, of the botched response to the COVID crisis. It is not debatable that the United States did this more poorly than any nation on earth. With that being said, the states were left, whether it was to find PPE, which, remember, we were supposed to have a strategic national stockpile, that didn't exist. And then in March, the president said, we're going to give everybody who wants a test will be able to get one. And then the next week, he said the governors have to do it all. I think the most egregious thing happened this morning. After months of preparation amongst a very frustrated population around very limited amounts of vaccines and trying to ethically and medically figure out who to get it to who are most threatened, long-term care and health providers, states have had to do this on their own. And there's a patchwork of things going on. In the midst of all that, rules have been continuing to change. And one of the rules changed that said who we should vaccinate out of this group in DC. Well, in Minnesota, that opened up the pool of folks that should get a vaccine up to 2.1 million. I'm all for it. The faster, is it going fast enough? No, it can never go fast enough. And we've been saying that. But our dosage was 60,000. So I, along with 6 other governors, sent a letter asking, why does it make sense to be holding back this reserve? Because they told us, do not plan for your second doses. You don't need to hold them. We are holding them in a storehouse in reserve, and we'll send them to you. For 4 months, we planned on that. And they told us that. And I and my team spent hundreds of hours doing that. We sent the letter this week and said, don't hold them back, release them. They said, okay. They were lying. They don't have any doses held back. There is no strategic supply for the second doses. So in answer to your question, we were on early this morning. We will continue to do what we've had to do, clean up the mess that the federal government leaves us with. The implications for Minnesota and for Minnesotans is, it will, as we said, we were already in a situation where the shortage from the federal government, I have 2.1 million of you in line, and they gave us 60,000. I can't go and buy them somewhere. I can't beg them from somewhere. I can't even have them shipped directly to me. They ship them to CVS, ship them to Walgreens, ship them to the hospitals. The small amount that I get, I can try and direct the best we can. With that being said, we've got a plan in place to use the dosages that we have. We're 5 days away from this disaster going away. We saw for the first time since the pandemic started a cohesive long-term plan to address both economics, health, safety, and the state's needs to be able to implement this. This is a process akin to putting a man on the moon. And it was described last night by the president as one of the biggest undertakings since World War II in terms of logistics. But somehow we've got folks that simply think they can just magically appear, or it's like, putting flyers on people's cars. It is so complex and so detailed, and to have this happen. So I'm doing this in real time with you. I have been frustrated at times beyond belief, but this one is so far beyond the pale to be almost unimaginable. And I'm going to call it, where did they go? Who's going to be prosecuted for this? What are the states to do when they've been lied to and made all their plans around this? I don't know the answer to those yet, but here in Minnesota, the vaccines we have and the distribution that's set up is strong and robust. We are going to lean into those changes that were made on Tuesday, and we already have, that hospitals are moving beyond 1A. I can tell you this, that skilled nursing facilities and the contracts for that, I was on the phone last night with the leadership of Walgreens and CVS. Skilled nursing facilities in Minnesota will be done by Monday, it's coming Monday. And long-term care facilities, the 1,000 some of those are scheduled to have those done on the 30th of January. So that process is moving. The next 1B that we will be announcing in the next several days, we're going to have to go back and reevaluate what this news means, what it meant for the promise that we were going to get, and what it meant for the planning that we were going to put forward. But I am hopeful that this new commitment, this idea that this, again, we're at the highest number of deaths and the highest number of cases. It did not need to be this way. Nations like Taiwan of 21 million people have 757 cases and 7 deaths, and their businesses have been open because they tested and contact traced, protected their hospitals, and did things right. This was an abject failure, and now they've added a final, unimaginable injustice by not doing what they said they were going to do and leading us down that. So more to come on this. I think you can expect, Teddy, I don't know if I'm forecasting anything, early next week, there'll be a much more detailed, strictly focused on vaccine plan that was already in place and the adjustments because of this. So
Just one follow-up,
Sure.
I'm so sorry. With all those challenges, are you concerned that we don't have enough vaccine in our state for people to get their second dose?
I'm not sleeping because of it. I am certainly, yes, I am deeply concerned. I do have confidence in the data system that's set up and some of the things that's happening for that second dose. I think I would remind people, especially what it does with the Pfizer and the Moderna, there's not a lot of research around the efficacy of what happens if you don't get that second dose in a certain amount of time. It certainly looks like, and it was more AstraZeneca that did some of that work, that you are protected to a certain degree after that first dose an extended period of time. But the way I understand the science behind this, whenever you get that second dose, you do have immunity. So it's not as if we wasted all these first doses, and if they don't get them in 21 days, all of those are for naught. It's not true. If you get that on time at 21 days, that's the ideal time to get it to get full immunity. But if you get it in 200 days, you'll still get full immunity at that. But our goal needs to be to not allow that to happen, because the only choice we have in this country now out of this is massive distribution of the vaccine, because it's been so messed up. And so our way of getting out of this, now I feel much more confident because long-term care and health providers in 1A are reaching the end of that and the second doses that will come in. But here's the problem again. I've got 2.1 million Minnesotans saying, whoo, get us the vaccine. And everybody's out there, and all of your newspapers are saying, why aren't you getting them out there faster? I could show you a chart up here what 2.1 million looks like, and I got 60,000 doses. Now I've got to figure out how many of those 60,000 doses I've got to make up that they promised me were going to be for those second doses. So yeah, it's a catastrophe of what they've done. But the technology's there. The new administration has pledged 100 million doses and in arms in the first 100 days. That type of scale and going keeps Minnesota moving towards that return to normalcy sooner. And again, just to be candid, the things that we're going to now have to recommit to during this, the masking and the social distancing, we're at day 15 since New Year's Eve, and we haven't spiked out. We stopped coming down, but we haven't spiked out. And there's some really good signs. Hospital usage is way low. And just for example, today out of 46,000 tests, our case positivity rate, it's a 1 day, don't make anything out of it, but it's a 1 day, it was 3.5. I think it's been 7 months since we've seen 3.5%. So it's good news right now that the hot spot is not in the upper Midwest Great Lakes, and that might buy us enough time. But we got work to do. Because
You're looking at buying doses straight from the companies now? Is that even possible?
I don't think it's possible. I brought it up. I'm turning over every stone. I talked to Governor Whitmer, and we said maybe we can buy them. Here's the thing. They're super expensive. there are tax dollars. Who the heck has the money for those 50 million? Where did the money go? Who did it? We've explored it. It's super expensive to do it. But I got to tell you now, I have to turn over every stone. I can't count on them to do it. So I brought up with Governor Whitmer as a suggestion. But it's going to be hard. And the question is, would they even do it? Because again, I think folks got to keep in mind this. Pfizer and Moderna, along with AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, they have contracts to countries all over the world. And as a human being, we should be concerned that folks, whether they be in Zaire or whether they be here, they got to get their vaccines at some point. And this whole thing, once again, they've created this absolute mess where the whole world's rushing instead of this coordinated effort. So, I mean, I'm pretty fit to be tied over this one. So I don't know if it's possible. I made a suggestion that it might be, because I'm asking my team to turn over every stone.
Yeah, Governor, in terms of rollout, I'm sure you've heard Governor Tony Evers has mobilized some mobile clinics to vaccination labs, I believe. Are there any plans for our state with that?
Yeah, we've certainly, we've been going on that. I would guess they'll probably reevaluate after the news today, because again, you can set this up if you don't have any vaccines to put into arms. Yeah, I think that's what because again, some of you saw this last week, our testing model is the strongest in the country, and that is predicated on a lot of these local test sites being open and to be able to move some of those right away. So those plans have been in action. It's just implementing them is so difficult to predict because of this unpredictability of the administration's ability. Keep in mind, they promised 20 million. We were told we would have 593 by the end of December. It's just gone down every week, and they've not got them out. And now this, gut punch that, again, I was taking the victory lap when 7 governors said release that, and they said yes. I said, all right, we're making progress. They knew when they told us they were going to release them, they didn't have any. Who does that? Who is the secretary? What does Secretary Azars think? You don't think people are going to find out? They're not going to show up here, but it's been the same thing. Now we'll just blame the states. We'll just blame the states if it doesn't show up. I assume that that's what the plan was, but boy, those who say we need to move on and stuff like that, I'm not a big move on person when there needs to be accountability. And I would hope that we find out, especially on this one, where those vaccines went.
I have one more, sorry. Aside from supply, are there any other barriers to vaccinating people, and how are you approaching those to overcome them?
Yeah, the question was about barriers to vaccinating folks. It's how do you think about who gets in line? And I think all of you are thinking about one of these clinics. Go ahead and just imagine this right now, and I'll go ahead and help you write your stories for next week. We say there's a clinic and we open up a website and you're able to sign up, and all of the available slots are taken in 90 seconds. And everybody else, the 2 million who sign on, get I'm sorry, the vaccine doses are done. Now that turns into a story. What happened? I have been told, like, whenever we do those things, those are barriers. Our websites get massive traffic, and if we open up some of those and we have to keep the data around who we vaccinate and how we get those appointments, it's been brought to my attention that, and I mean, I get why you do this. There are bots, including news organization bots, that refresh our websites 90 times in a minute, eating up all that bandwidth. So if all of a sudden next week we announce there's going to be clinics, and if you're 65 and over, you can get a shot, come here to get your appointment. In Florida, they just said, just show up. So you had seniors at 3 a.m. sitting outside and they didn't have any vaccine. So yeah, there's barriers. But what I will tell you is the thoughtfulness that's gone into the planning. I oftentimes think that gets lost over, and people will make well-meaning suggestions. Why don't you just bring those vaccines in as people are waiting in line at Target, give them shots. They mean well. They don't understand all of the logistics that goes into that. And especially when we're dealing with a highly, a shelf life that's so short on these vaccines, and the problem with with some of the vaccines is once they come in 980 increments, and you have to use them all, so you have to plan accordingly because you don't want to waste any. So we've taken up some time here, and it's about security. I'm glad you got me into this. We've had the vaccines now approved for 32 days. The country needs these. The sense of urgency around them is great. The obvious catastrophic failure of getting them out is becoming more apparent. But much like testing and much like PPE, we can't spend much time just complaining about it. There'll be a time for that, and I'll do plenty of it on the federal government. But we got to figure out the fix. I think the good news for Minnesotans is our partners in this, the healthcare systems, are incredible partners. They're trying to find solutions. And I have to be candid with you. After I talked last night to the leadership in Walgreens and CVS, I felt better. But this is for all of you on this data piece of this, where how did Minnesota drop from 12th to 25th? 1 week is 25% of the time we've been vaccinating. We get our vaccines at a different point in the week than others. And I found out last night that when one of our major healthcare chains gives the vaccine, there's a 3.4 day delay till that shows up. So we've been having this discussion around how come we're not moving faster, and it's around data lags and some of that. Think about this. Spending our time thinking about that, when I find out today that the 50 million doses that were promised and that were in reserve for the second dose that we've been planning on for 6 months didn't even exist. So I have to be candid with all of you. We're doing the big step back, reevaluate it all. But I think once again, that I would end with this. That same exact thing happened around testing. And what came out of that was a really unique partnership between the healthcare systems, University of Minnesota, the Mayo Clinic, state of Minnesota, and now recognized as the most robust. What came out of that is the state creating its own strategic national stockpile of PPE. And now we have that and are prepared for the next pandemic should we need it. And I would just assure Minnesotans, the next thing that we're obviously going to have to do is do that with the vaccine. But here's the difference. The first major policy speech given by the next president, who will be in 5 days, was focused exactly on this, exactly what we've been asking for, exactly on the fixes. So I think from a Minnesotan perspective on this, you can feel confident that we will get this. But I would ask you again, you're going to have to be a little patient because there's things to be done. So we'll be safe. Stay safe this weekend, Minnesotans. Continue to mask up. And we're just 1 day closer to spring and 1 day closer to the end of this.